Hello, everyone. It's Phil Jacobus. It's August 20th, Thursday. I'm here at my home in Woodstock, New York. It's a beautiful day, sunny and mild. Today, have the distinct pleasure of being joined by Paul Frisch. Paul is one of the most interesting guys that I know and a very knowledgeable fellow. But before we join Paul, I'd like to share with you some of the latest news on Healthcare Business News Online. Here's a story about Medicare reimbursement for radiologists could drop by 10% next year. This is a big deal. It's something that the radiologists are worried about and something that the government is focusing on. So read this story. I think you'll find it interesting. Also, here's another story of interest to some of our readers. 626 Holdings has purchased FiGem parts. FiGem is headed by Josh Glass. He's a really great guy, and it's a really great company, and has sold his company to 626 Holdings. So that's an interesting piece of news. Just two things that you would learn if you looked at our news. Online. It's free, and I really encourage you to sign up for our news. And now, without any further fanfare, let me introduce Paul Frisch. Paul, say hello to our audience at Healthcare Business News.
Hello, everybody. I wish everyone well.
You know, Paul is one of the most interesting people I know. He is certainly one of the most experienced people I know. He is an associate attending in the Department of Medical Physics at Memorial Sloan Kettering, where he is also the chief of biomedical engineering. Paul is also the president of the Intelligent Health Association, and they have a pavilion every year at HIMSS. I got that right, correct, Paul? The Intelligent Health?
Yeah, Intelligent Health Association. Perfect.
Intelligent Health Association. He's also the Chief Technology Officer for the RFID in healthcare. And if all of that weren't enough, he's also the president of the New York Metropolitan Clinical Engineering Society. And the one thing I will say about Paul is, in addition to being a down-to-earth person, he's and a charming guy. He's also very humble. So Paul, I want to thank you for joining us. You're the high point of our week.
I appreciate the invitation and thank you for all the kind words.
So Paul, you're like a guy standing on top of the mountain because you can see in many different directions. Clinical engineering, let's start there. Clinical engineering is changing. How is it changing, in your opinion?
Well, I think the different types of technology that are now being applied to the clinical environment significantly impacts the way clinical engineering operates. So we no longer deal with standalone devices, monitoring or infusion pumps. These devices are all typically networked now. A lot of them are wireless. A lot of them integrate with other devices and or clinical applications. We work together with IT and we have synergies with a variety of departments to kind of define and establish workflows that work for the institution to ensure that the data is seamlessly sent from one place to another, guaranteeing the accuracy of the data, and also ensuring that the data is looked at by the right people and available as quickly as possible. We deliver to the EMR, we deliver to point of care devices. So the whole environment in which biomedical engineering or clinical engineering worked in the past is very, very different now. And it requires different strategies, different skill sets, and even different motivations to make things happen.
How do the physicians and the nursing staff interface with clinical engineering in this new environment?
Well, so, the hospitals, Memorial Sloan Kettering and other hospitals have all set up a variety of committees where they look at product lines, they look at supplies, they talk about workflows, they talk about new and evolving technologies to kind of have everybody on the same page and the same level of understanding. But the working environment is different. I mean, 20 years ago, they called us, my machine doesn't work, it needs to be repaired. Today, we get much more involved in the early game decisions, talking about what the requirements are, what wants to be accomplished. And, you know, biomed has a different role now than it did many years ago.
Now, I know that you were instrumental and maybe single-handedly put together, I'm sure not single-handedly, but put together the pavilion at HIMSS for the Intelligent Health Association. How does that integrate into biomedical engineering or clinical engineering?
Right. So I to start, I didn't do it single-handedly, obviously, and there was a lot of support from other people like myself and the manufacturers of equipment, and we worked together. My role was to design a pavilion that would demonstrate how new and evolving technologies really can fit together to solve some very specific problems in a hospital. So how do we get information to the point of care? How do we know where devices are? How do we know if they're available for use? So it's all the business processes of a hospital, how to optimize them and how to work together with different groups. So the objective of the pavilion was to focus on technologies that existed and to demonstrate their functionality and potential in the healthcare environment. So the pavilion was not just a showcase of equipment, it was a showcase of the workflow. We built an OR, we built an ICU, we built various types of operations in the hospital. And the focus was really to demonstrate how this equipment fits into the workflow, not so much only how the technology worked. So it was a little different of approach.
What about RFID? Is RFID, to what extent do you think that's been embraced nationwide?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I'm going to take a guess on the number. I'm going to say, I'm going to say the number somewhere between 15 to 20% of the institutions use some form of RFID. The issues with RFID is there is a cost associated with RFID, and you have to be able to demonstrate in a capital budget that the hospital's putting for how you compare against buying other devices or buying other pieces of equipment. So the ability to say a device is somewhere in a hospital has not taken as much of an effect as I had hoped it would in the past. I think it will start to move. I think that hospitals have made some mistakes in the way they use RFID. RFID is an institutional solution, and when you start to deploy it, you immediately see that there are a million use cases out there where RFID can be of benefit. And it's only when you start putting together a large number of use cases that you actually start to see the ROI and or the benefit of the package. Single applications like hand hygiene or tracking a specific set of equipment becomes dependent on how important that particular application is, and becomes a little harder to justify the whole thing. So you have to kind of hit RFID from an institutional level and say, this is what we could do with RFID. And you pay a lot of money up front to get only a few applications going, but it evolves very quickly.
I see. So the RFID footprint is expensive, but the expansion isn't as expensive as the initial installation.
The expansion is where you start to see the ROI, because you pay for a base system has a certain cost associated with it, and depending on what you're using it for. So if you're only using it for one thing, the cost is pretty high. If you're using it for multiple applications, you start to put the cost out across a broad base. From a hospital perspective, the reason it's difficult for us is because we cross department lines. And it's very hard, it's much harder to sell an institutional solution than it is to say, this department needs a specific device or a specific application to do a specific function. So
now,
we don't sell it as well as we hope either.
Another question I'd like to ask, I wasn't feeling well and I made an appointment to see my physician virtually. Will these virtual consultations be handled by clinical engineering or by IT if there's a problem? Where does who's takes the lead in the virtual space?
Well, I would say that if we're looking at a virtual, virtual space falls into a lot of different categories. Biomedical is one of them, but in terms of a virtual office visit, that's probably mostly telecommunications, uh, and communications type of things that will probably be mostly IT in most hospitals. As soon as you start to transition uh, to include telemedicine components. So have devices at your home that you can send data from your home to the hospital itself. Biomed will then start to get on equal footing with IT also.
I see. Um, there's a bill before Congress that gives hospitals access to certain diagnostic tools and during COVID, so that if the OEMs can't get to a site to perform PMs or remediate or service, that the in-house departments can do it.
Yes, so I mean that is what clinical engineering does, right? By definition. So we get trained typically from the manufacturers to a certain level, and we provide in-house repairs and maintenance. So, however, as the devices become more and more complex, it becomes a bigger and bigger challenge. And for devices that the hospital has a limited number of onesies and twosies of devices, it becomes very hard to maintain a skill set within the hospital. So compared to a series of devices where I have 4,000 of them and I, have some hands-on experience all the time. As devices become more and more software based, there is an issue there in terms of training, because as the software changes on devices, there needs to be an update set of training that goes along with clinical engineering also. So it becomes just a little bit more of a complex issue. But I do strongly believe that there's a large portion of devices that should be maintained internally by the hospital.
Well, Paul, speaking with you is always a learning experience every time we visit. And I always walk away smarter than when I pick up the phone or shake hands with you, which I hope I get to do sometime soon, maybe at one of the New York Metropolitan Clinical Engineering Society meetings, which is certainly an easy name for me to remember.
Yeah,
Uh, Thank you very much for joining us.
it's
And
certainly my pleasure. And I have to say, the experience is the same on my side. I learned a lot about various operations in radiation oncology and the work that you do that contribute to my skill set, fortunately, and help me to do my job better also.
thank you very much for joining us. Now